Imagine carrying a pain so deep that even the act of breathing feels like a challenge. Now, imagine facing that pain not with despair, but with a faith so unshakable it transforms tragedy into a powerful testimony. Sounds impossible? Well, that's the story of the Shunammite woman, one of the most impactful and moving accounts in the Bible. An ordinary woman living in a time of great challenges, who, through her faith and perseverance, made space for God to work incredible miracles. Miracles that continue to inspire generations. But wait, did you know that her hospitality, given without expecting anything in return, led to the greatest gift of her life? It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? In a world where so many are focused on seeking blessings, the Shunammite shows us that often the secret lies in serving, not asking. And when tragedy struck, and it struck with devastating force, she refused to let the pain define her. Instead, she gave us an extraordinary example of faith in the midst of suffering, showing that trusting God, even in the darkest moments, can bring light and hope. Here's the point that many miss. The Shunammite's miracle didn't start when her son was resurrected. It began much earlier, when she decided to open her home and her life for God to work. It's a lesson that resonates even today. Have you ever stopped to think about how small acts of generosity and faith can trigger miracles in your own life? This story is not just an account from the past. It's an invitation to reflect on how you can live in a way that makes the impossible possible. Get ready to embark on a journey that will challenge your beliefs, strengthen your faith, and perhaps even bring answers to the deepest questions of your heart. But beware, what you're about to discover may change the way you view miracles and the presence of God in your life. The Shunammite woman is a figure that transports us to the heart of the Bible's inspiring stories, where ordinary people lived under the light of faith, even amidst seemingly insurmountable challenges. Who is she? She may not be a widely discussed character, but her story, found in 2 Kings 4, unveils profound layers of faith, hospitality, and perseverance. In an era marked by rigid social roles, especially for women, the Shunammite emerges as an example of courage and wisdom in the context of Israelite society. She lived in Shunem, a small town, and was known for her generosity and reverence for the things of God. Isn't it curious how someone without a recorded name can have such a lasting impact on the spiritual lessons we learn? In the society of that time, women generally played defined roles, often confined to the domestic sphere. They were caregivers, homemakers, and often invisible in historical records. However, the Shunammite woman breaks this mold. She was respected in her community, a woman of means, and held a position of influence within her household, especially with her husband. Imagine living in a society where opportunities were so restricted, yet still finding ways to act with purpose and meaning. Examples of faith in the Bible, like hers, remind us that determination knows no boundaries. What stands out about the Shunammite is her spiritual perception and hospitable attitude. When she noticed that the prophet Elisha frequently passed through her town, she immediately offered to host him. Here we see a clear example of biblical hospitality, where welcoming others was more than a cultural practice. It was a demonstration of faith. Think about it. How often do we have the opportunity to open our doors, not just physically but emotionally, to someone in need? Her story challenges us to reevaluate how we can practice hospitality in our own lives. It's also interesting to observe how the relationship between the Shunammite woman and Elisha developed. It wasn't just a casual connection, but a spiritual partnership. Hosting the prophet wasn't just an altruistic gesture, but also an expression of her faith. It's a reminder that often, small acts trigger the greatest miracles in the Old Testament. How many times do we let opportunities for simple, yet transformative actions pass us by? Perhaps welcoming someone today could be the starting point for something extraordinary tomorrow. The Shunammite woman's position as an influential figure in her household also speaks volumes about her strength of character. Convincing her husband to build a room for Elisha was no trivial task, considering the patriarchal context of the time. Her story vividly demonstrates how faith and determination can overcome cultural barriers. Looking at this gesture, we see that the miracle of the Shunammite son began long before his conception. It was born in the generous heart of a woman who recognized God's presence amidst her daily routines. Furthermore, her attitude makes us reflect on how hospitality goes beyond simply offering a space or a meal. It's about creating an environment where God can work, as he did in the Shunammite's home. For those seeking practical ways to apply this lesson today, consider small actions. Supporting a neighbor in need, welcoming someone who needs a listening ear, or simply contributing to the community with genuine love. These actions, no matter how small they seem, have the potential to become seeds for future miracles of spiritual resurrection in our lives and others. This story also introduces an intriguing element. What motivates us to act with generosity, even without expecting anything in return? The Shunammite woman didn't ask Elisha for anything, yet her faith and hospitality opened doors to unimaginable blessings. It's at this point that we begin to see how her journey transcends her own story, setting the stage for the next act in this narrative, the unexpected rewards that God had reserved for her faithfulness. The hospitality of the Shunammite woman is a memorable example of biblical hospitality in its purest and most genuine form. When she noticed that Elisha frequently passed through Shunem, her first reaction was to offer him a meal. It was a simple gesture, but one that demonstrated a heart attuned to the needs of others. Isn't it fascinating how seemingly small actions can have immeasurable impacts? In the culture of that time, welcoming a traveler was more than a duty. It was an opportunity to honor God through caring for others. Thus, the Shunammite teaches us that generosity lies not only in what we give, but in the intention with which we offer it. This initial gesture grew into something even more significant. The Shunammite, with her attentive gaze and sensitive spirit, realized that Elisha was no ordinary traveler. He was a man of God, a vessel of miracles. She then made the decision to build a room in her house, something that required resources, planning, and above all, faith. She understood that creating physical space for Elisha was, in some way, creating spiritual space for God to work. In her life and in her family's life, how often do we neglect the opportunity to create spaces in our own lives for something greater? Perhaps this means setting aside time for prayer or even opening our homes to share a meal with someone in need. The impact of this gesture goes beyond what is visible. By hosting Elisha, the Shunammite woman not only changed her own story, but also became part of the prophet's story and God's plan for Israel. This is a powerful reminder of how generosity can create connections that transcend time. When you offer something of yourself, be it time, resources, or even a word of encouragement, you never know how far it might reach. Inspiring stories from the Bible, like this one, show us that generosity opens doors for God to work in ways we could never imagine. There is a fascinating detail in this narrative. The Shunammite didn't ask for anything in return. Her generosity was selfless, without ulterior motives. This leads us to reflect on our own motivations. Do we act with kindness, expecting recognition or reward? Or are we capable of giving with the same selfless heart as the Shunammite? It's a question that invites us to reassess our priorities and perhaps shift our perspective on what it truly means to give. Another significant aspect is how her decision was born from spiritual discernment. She recognized something special in Elisha and responded with action. Today, we are often so busy that we fail to notice the opportunities God places before us. But the story of the Shunammite woman challenges us to remain attentive. Who knows, the next Elisha that crosses our path might be an opportunity to witness miracles in our own lives. Additionally, her generosity exemplifies how faith and action go hand in hand. It's not enough to simply believe. We must act. The Shunammite woman didn't just admire the prophet from a distance. She took concrete steps to support him. This reminds us that faith without works is dead, as Scripture teaches. If we want to experience miracles like those in the Old Testament, we must be willing to take the first step, even when we don't know what lies ahead. And of course, this generosity planted the seed for an extraordinary event. The act of opening her home to Elisha not only changed the dynamics of her family, but also paved the way for the miracle of the Shunammite's son. Imagine what could happen in our lives if we chose to act with the same willingness. Every act of generosity could be the beginning of a story we will never forget. The Shunammite woman certainly did not expect anything in return when she welcomed the prophet Elisha into her home, but that's exactly how miracles often happen, when we're not looking for them. One day, Elisha, moved by her generosity, felt inspired to ask what he could do for her. And that's when the unexpected promise emerged. She would have a son. Imagine her surprise. In a time when infertility was seen as a social stigma, receiving such a promise must have felt like hearing the impossible. Here, we begin to see how biblical hospitality and faith intertwine in profound ways. The Shunammite's reaction to the promise was a mix of caution and hope. She even expressed a certain reluctance, asking Elisha not to toy with her emotions. Who could blame her? It was a promise too great to process immediately. How often do we, when faced with an unexpected blessing, feel the same way, almost afraid to believe? This episode teaches us that faith is not always a bold leap. Sometimes it's a hesitant but sincere step toward what God has for us. The arrival of the son was undoubtedly a transformative moment in the Shunammite's life. It wasn't just the fulfillment of Elisha's promise, but also a testament to God's power in action. This is the kind of event we frequently encounter in the Bible. Moments when God directly intervenes in people's lives to demonstrate his sovereignty and grace. But here's the thing. The blessing of the son was not just a gift. It was a response to the woman's faith and generosity. This raises a question. How might God respond to our own acts of faith today? Moreover, the birth of the son wasn't just a moment of joy for the Shunammite and her family. It was also a reaffirmation that God sees the details of our lives. He saw the silent longing in that woman's heart and responded in a way only he could. For those who face silent struggles or unrealized dreams today, this story is a powerful reminder that God works in his perfect timing. He turns tragedy into hope, both in the Bible and in our everyday lives. Another important lesson is that this miracle wasn't merely a reward, but an invitation to deeper faith. The story of the Shunammite woman shows us that God's blessings often come with challenges that push us to trust him even more. If you've ever experienced a moment when a blessing brought with it greater responsibility, you know exactly what this story is about. The promised son also reminds us that God is an expert at rewriting stories. In Israelite culture, being childless was considered a significant disadvantage, but God, through Elisha, turned this narrative upside down. The miracle of the Shunammite's son challenges us to believe that no matter how difficult a situation may seem, God can bring life where there was once barrenness, whether literal or metaphorical. Where in your life do you need a resurrection miracle? Finally, this miracle sets the stage for the next chapter in the story, a moment when the Shunammite's faith would be tested like never before. Because, as we learn throughout the stories of women in the Bible, true faith is refined in the fire of adversity. So, while we celebrate the joy of the son's birth, we sense in the background that this journey is just beginning. The joy of the Shunammite woman and her family seemed complete with the birth of the promised son. Everything was well until an unexpected tragedy deeply shook their lives. One day, without warning, the boy fell ill and died in his mother's arms. Imagine the weight of that pain. The son, who was a divine answer to prayer, was now gone. This moment in the narrative carries profound emotional impact, revealing the contrast between the promise of life and the reality of death. This duality, tragedy and hope in the Bible, is a recurring theme that always prompts us to reflect on how we react to seemingly irreversible situations. The Shunammite's reaction is extraordinary. Instead of succumbing to despair, she remained calm and acted with determination. She placed the boy's body in the prophet Elisha's room and set out to seek help. This is a rare example of faith in the midst of pain. Many people, when faced with loss, are consumed by sorrow or paralyzed by fear. Yet the Shunammite teaches us that even amidst suffering, it's possible to act in faith and seek divine intervention. How often, when facing crises, do we forget to take that courageous step? Her attitude sharply contrasts with what we might expect as a natural human reaction. After all, despair is the instinctive response to loss. But the Shunammite chose a different path. She refused to accept the end of the story. This kind of perseverance is one of the greatest examples of faith amid pain found in the Bible's inspiring stories. It's as if she was saying, "This isn't over. God can still act." Her stance challenges us to reconsider how we face our own struggles. Are we giving up too soon? Another fascinating aspect of this narrative is how she dealt with those around her. When her husband asked why she was going to see Elisha, she simply replied that everything was fine. This small detail reveals something profound. The Shunammite did not allow the doubts or fears of others to contaminate her faith. In our own lives, we are often influenced by those who don't share the same hope or confidence. Her example encourages us to guard our faith, even when surrounded by skepticism. Moreover, the act of placing her son's body in Elisha's room was not random. It symbolized her trust that God, through the prophet, could do something extraordinary. This gesture was like a silent prayer, a declaration that she still believed in the impossible. In times of crisis, our actions often speak louder than our words. Think about how, in our own difficult moments, we can act in ways that demonstrate our faith in God. The Shunammite story also reminds us that pain is not the end. Her decision to seek out Elisha reflects her belief that God was still in control of the situation. Even when all seems lost, faith propels us to take the next step. In our own lives, this could mean praying more fervently, seeking wise counsel, or simply refusing to give up. Like her, we are called to see beyond the present and trust that God is working, even when we don't understand his ways. Finally, the Shunammite's tragedy sets the stage for one of God's most powerful miracles, resurrection. This moment of extreme pain becomes the starting point for a glorious demonstration of divine sovereignty. But before we witness this miracle, we are invited to walk with her through the process of faith, perseverance, and determination. For it is often in this journey that we discover the true, transformative power of God. When tragedy struck the Shunammite woman, her response was marked by admirable perseverance. Instead of succumbing to grief, she made a bold decision to seek out Elisha, the man of God, without hesitation. This act reflects one of the greatest lessons in the Bible's stories, the necessity of acting in faith, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Imagine the scene. Her son was dead, and she needed to journey to find Elisha. There were doubts, obstacles, and the weight of her sorrow, but none of these paralyzed her. Her determination is a reminder that true faith is not passive. It is active. The Shunammite's journey to Elisha was not just physical, it was spiritual as well. Every step she took toward the prophet was a silent declaration of her trust in God. It's easy to speak of faith when everything is going well, but it's in moments of crisis that faith is truly tested. She teaches us that, even amidst chaos, it's possible to remain focused on what truly matters. In our lives today, this might mean seeking God in prayer, turning to spiritual counsel, or standing firm in our convictions despite challenging circumstances. When she reached Elisha, her approach was direct yet filled with reverence. She threw herself at his feet, a gesture that conveyed both the intensity of her pain and the depth of her trust. How often, in our own crises, do we seek solutions in the wrong places? The Shunammite knew that Elisha was God's instrument for her situation, and her decision to go to him reflected her spiritual understanding. This story challenges us to ask, where do we run in times of need? Are we seeking answers in God or in temporary alternatives that cannot truly help us? Elisha's role in this narrative is also significant. He represents divine intercession, a bridge between human problems and heavenly solutions. When the Shunammite shared her pain with him, Elisha responded with action, initially sending his servant and later going himself to the boy. This reminds us that God does not ignore our pain. He responds to it in ways that often exceed our understanding. The Shunammite's perseverance in seeking Elisha illustrates how our faith can move both heaven and earth. Another powerful lesson here is the importance of persistence. When Elisha's servant was unable to revive the boy, the Shunammite did not give up. She stayed with the prophet, insisting that he go personally to her son. How often do we abandon our search for solutions after initial failures? The Shunammite's faith challenges us to keep asking, seeking, and knocking, as Jesus taught us. Persistence in the face of discouragement is one of the greatest examples of faith in the Bible. Moreover, the Shunammite's determination shows that faith doesn't eliminate pain, but gives us the strength to face it. She did not deny her sorrow, yet she refused to let it dictate her response. This combination of emotional honesty and decisive action is something we can all apply. In moments of loss, we can find strength by remembering that God honors those who approach Him with confidence and persistence. It is in this tension between grief and hope, loss and expectation, that we are brought to the climax of the story, the moment when God demonstrates His power through resurrection. But before we reach that point, we are invited to reflect on what it means to seek God wholeheartedly, as the Shunammite woman did. Sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't in the answer we receive, but in the transformation that occurs within us during the journey of faith. We arrive at the most dramatic moment of the narrative, the miracle of resurrection. When Elisha arrived at the Shunammite woman's house, he found the boy lying dead in the room she had prepared for the prophet. It is a scene that blends despair and faith. The mother hoped for the impossible while the prophet, God's instrument, prepared to act. This story is a powerful reminder that even when all seems lost, God's faithfulness can rewrite any situation. Stories from the Bible, like this one, reveal that the ending is not determined by circumstances, but by divine sovereignty. Elisha did not act hastily or in desperation. He went to the room, shut the door, and began to pray. This detail is significant. Before attempting anything, he sought God. It is a valuable lesson for all of us. How often do we try to resolve problems with our own strength, forgetting to seek divine guidance first? Elisha teaches us that prayer is the starting point for any miracle. Perhaps in our own lives, we should begin facing our challenges with a moment of silence and surrender to God. Elisha's act of lying upon the boy was a demonstration of faith and obedience. It was an unusual gesture, but one filled with meaning. He positioned himself as an intercessor, someone literally offering his life on behalf of another. This moment reflects the power of intercession, a practice that continues to transform lives today. When we pray for others or act as bridges between God and those in need, we imitate Elisha's gesture. Consider how often a prayer or a gesture of support can be the first step to restoring someone's hope. The resurrection itself was a moment of pure divine intervention. When the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes, it wasn't merely a return to physical life. It was a declaration that God is Lord over life and death. This miracle, like so many others in the Old Testament, reminds us that there are no limits to what God can do. For those facing seemingly impossible situations today, the resurrection of the Shunammite son is proof that God still performs miracles. Yet this story is also about restoration, not just in a literal sense. The Shunammite didn't just receive her son back. She gained a deeper understanding of God's faithfulness. Often, when we endure loss and hardship, the greatest blessing isn't what we recover, but what we learn about God's character in the process. The miracle of the Shunammite son is a vivid illustration that even in pain, God is working to restore what has been lost. Elisha, as the prophet, played a crucial role, but he was not the author of the miracle. God was. This teaches us the importance of recognizing the source of all power and grace. Just as the Shunammite trusted Elisha as God's instrument, we are called to place our trust in God, knowing He can use people and circumstances to bring healing and restoration. How often do we forget that God can perform miracles through paths we cannot imagine? Finally, this moment of resurrection is not merely a conclusion. It is a new beginning. For the Shunammite, It was proof that faith and perseverance are never in vain. For us, it serves as a reminder that God is faithful, even when challenges seem overwhelming. But the story does not end here. As we learn from the stories of women in the Bible, every event is part of a greater plan, an invitation to trust God more deeply and witness how He continues to work in our lives. The story of the Shunammite woman is much more than a tale of miracles. It is a treasure trove of spiritual lessons that echo to this day. Every detail of this narrative invites us to reflect on what it means to have unshakable faith and to fully trust in God's sovereignty. From the moment she chose to welcome Elisha into her home to the miraculous resurrection of her son, we see how faith, perseverance, and hospitality serve as powerful tools to experience God's presence and power. It's impossible not to wonder, how can these lessons transform our own journey? One of the first lessons is the importance of cultivating practical faith, a faith that manifests through tangible actions. The Shunammite woman didn't just believe in God. She demonstrated her faith through acts of generosity and hospitality. In our lives, this might mean offering our time, resources, or simply a listening ear to someone in need. It's remarkable how these small acts, when done with love and intention, can open doors for miracles, not only in the Old Testament, but also in our own stories. Another powerful lesson is about perseverance. The Shunammite faced challenges that could have crushed her faith, but she chose to keep believing, even when everything seemed lost. This teaches us that perseverance is not just a virtue. It is an expression of trust in God. Imagine how often we give up before we see the miracle unfold. Her story challenges us to ask ourselves, are we persevering enough in our own battles of faith? Additionally, there is something profoundly inspiring about how she trusted in God's sovereignty. Even in the face of her son's death, she did not lose hope. This unwavering trust in God is one of the most striking examples of faith in the midst of pain found in the Bible's inspiring stories. It reminds us that even when we don't understand God's ways, we can trust that He is in control. This kind of faith challenges us to let go of control and allow God to work in our lives, even when the path seems unclear. Another highlight of this story is how it teaches us the importance of intercession. Elisha, as a prophet, was God's instrument to perform the miracle of resurrection, but it was the Shunammite's faith that moved him to act. In our lives, we can be like the Shunammite, interceding for those we love, or like Elisha, responding to God's call to help. Intercession is not just a spiritual practice. It is an act of love and faith that can change lives. This narrative also reminds us that God's miracles are not just about solving problems. They are about revealing His glory. The miracle of the Shunammite son was not just an isolated event. It was a demonstration of God's power and grace. For those facing seemingly impossible challenges today, this story serves as a reminder that God still works in the impossible. And perhaps the greatest miracle is not in the external circumstances, but in the internal transformation He brings to our hearts. Finally, the story of the Shunammite challenges us to live with a sense of expectancy. Just as she opened her home and life for God to work, we are called to do the same. This act of expectation allows us to see God's hand at work, even in the most difficult moments. Are we creating space for God to operate in our lives, as the Shunammite did? This is a question each of us must answer. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded that the Shunammite's journey of faith was not just about her. It was about showing all of us how faith, perseverance, and trust in God can transform any situation. But the story doesn't end here. After all, the stories of women in the Bible continue to teach, inspire, and challenge us to live in ways that honor God and impact those around us. Now that you know the story of the Shunammite woman, ask yourself, what is this powerful narrative trying to say directly to you? Are there areas in your life where faith is lacking, where fear has replaced trust? Or perhaps you need to rediscover the courage to act, even when everything seems lost. The faith of this woman, her hospitality, and her perseverance opened the door to a miracle that changed her story. But remember, God hasn't changed. He still works in the lives of those who trust him, and he can transform your story too. Here's a challenge for you. What are you willing to do to see God working in your life? Maybe it's time to let go of control and start acting in faith. It could be as simple as praying more intentionally, helping someone in need, or finally making that decision you've been putting off. What matters is taking the first step, just as the Shunammite woman did. Are you ready for that? If this story has touched you in any way, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and join us on a journey to discover how the stories of the Bible can impact your life today. After all, who said miracles are a thing of the past? Let's continue exploring these powerful lessons together. See you in the next video.